The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at 0800 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Representatives from 1,200 different species crowded into the massive crystalline chamber that floated in the void between stars. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the diverse atmospheric requirements of beings ranging from silicon-based rock creatures to methane-breathing gas dwellers. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire slammed his four-armed fist against the podium, causing ripples of bioluminescent anger to cascade across his scaled hide. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder, immediately silencing the countless conversations happening in dozens of different languages. Fellow beings of the galaxy, Zethkar's voice boomed through the universal translators. We gather today to address the greatest threat our civilization has ever faced. For 5,000 years, we have enjoyed unprecedented peace. Our trade routes flourish, our colonies expand, and our peoples prosper. But there is a cancer growing in the outer rim, a species so violent and unpredictable that they threaten the very foundation of our galactic harmony. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds. Some species clicked their mandibles in agreement, others released pheromone clouds of concern, and a few simply changed colors to express their emotions. The ethereal collective, beings of pure energy who rarely spoke, actually manifested physical forms to show their interest. You speak of the humans, came a melodic voice from the singing crystals of Harmonious Seven. Their representative was a towering formation of living gemstone that resonated with musical tones. They have been silent for 5 millennia. Their last contact with galactic civilization was when they withdrew from the Council after the Great War ended. Zethkar's eyes burned with righteous fury. Silent, yes, but not idle. Our long-range scouts have detected massive construction projects in human space. They are building something big. Military installations, shipyards larger than anything we've ever seen, and weapons that defy our understanding of physics. A nervous twitter came from the bird-like aerial dancers of Nimbus Station. Perhaps they are simply preparing for exploration? The humans were always known for their wanderlust. The Vorthak ambassador's laugh was like grinding metal. Exploration? They have fortified every single one of their star systems. Every asteroid has been converted into a fortress. Every planet bristles with defensive platforms. This is not exploration, my friends. This is preparation for war. The chamber fell silent. The weight of the accusation settled over the assembly like a suffocating blanket. War was something most of these species had never experienced. The last galactic conflict had ended before many of their civilizations had even achieved space flight. Elder Tamthara of the Wise Seekers, one of the oldest beings in the galaxy, slowly rose from her meditation platform. Her ancient voice carried the weight of millennia. I remember the last days of the Great War. I remember why humanity withdrew from galactic society. They were changed by what they had to become to end that conflict. Exactly. Zethkar seized upon her words. They revealed their true nature during that war. They are monsters wearing the mask of civilization. When cornered, they don't surrender or negotiate. They become something else entirely. Something that frightens even the ancient races. The crystalline hive mind of Sector 7 spoke through 1,000 voices at once, creating a harmony that few species could fully comprehend. We propose that humanity has evolved beyond such primitive instincts. 5,000 years of peace must have civilized them. Perhaps this military buildup is merely defensive, born from ancient trauma. Zethkar accessed his holographic display, filling the center of the chamber with images that made several species recoil in horror. Ships that seemed to bend space around them, weapons that could crack the crust of planets, and space stations that dwarfed small moons. Look at their constructions, he demanded. These are not the works of a peaceful species. These are the tools of conquest. They build in secret, they refuse all diplomatic contact, and their expansion into unclaimed systems grows bolder each year. The representative from the empathic collective, a being whose entire existence was dedicated to understanding emotions, suddenly convulsed. I sense something troubling from the direction of human space. There is joy, terrible, anticipatory joy. They are not afraid of discovery. They want to be found. This revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. Several smaller species began transmitting emergency signals to their home worlds, while others started calculating the distance between their territories and human space. The High Arbitrator of the Council, a being so ancient that its original species name had been forgotten, called for order. Its voice resonated through quantum fields rather than air, reaching every being simultaneously regardless of their sensory capabilities. If what Ambassador Zethkar suggests is true, then we face a decision that will define our civilization for the next age. Do we attempt diplomatic contact with humanity, hoping that 5 millennia have tempered their aggressive nature? Or do we accept that they represent an existential threat to galactic peace? The Mechanical Collective, a race of artificial beings that had long ago transcended biological existence, processed the question through their vast network of interconnected minds. Their response came as a series of perfectly calculated probabilities. Analysis suggests that human military capacity has grown exponentially during their isolation. Conservative estimates place their current fleet strength at approximately 10,000 times what it was during their last recorded engagement. Their technology appears to have developed along paths unknown to galactic science. Diplomatic contact carries a 23.7% chance of success, with a 76.3% probability of accelerating hostile intentions. The chamber buzzed with fearful energy. The swarm queens of the hive clusters began releasing distress pheromones that their worker drones, stationed throughout the galaxy, could detect across light years. The philosophical debaters of the Wisdom Councils fell silent for the first time in recorded history. Ambassador Zethkar raised his arms, commanding attention once more. The choice before us is simple, but not easy. We can wait and hope that humanity remains content in their isolation, knowing that every day makes them stronger. Or we can act now, while we still have the advantage of numbers and surprise. You propose war, Elder Tamtheros said quietly. Do you understand what you ask? Most of our peoples have never known conflict. We have no standing militaries, no weapons of war. We would have to become the very thing we've spent millennia evolving beyond. Better to become warriors now than slaves later, Zethkar replied grimly. I have seen their historical records from the Great War. When humanity decides to fight, they don't simply defeat their enemies. They remake the very nature of warfare itself. They break rules that other species didn't know existed. The energy beings of the Void Realms, who existed partially outside normal space-time, provided a perspective that chilled every organic being present. We have observed temporal distortions around human space. They are not simply building in 3 dimensions. They are constructing something that extends through time itself. This suggests preparation not for a single battle, but for a war spanning generations. The revelation that humans might be manipulating time sent panic through species that had never even dreamed such technology was possible. The mathematical minds of the computing clusters began working frantically to understand the implications, while the mystical orders of various spiritually oriented species declared it an abomination against the natural order. As the session continued for hours, a consensus began to emerge. Species after species stood to voice their concerns about human isolation and military buildup. Even the traditionally pacifist races acknowledged that the evidence was troubling. Finally, the High Arbitrator called for a preliminary vote. All those in favor of formally declaring humanity a threat to galactic peace and stability? Arms, tentacles, energy fields, and various other appendages rose throughout the chamber. The count was overwhelmingly in favor. All those opposed. Only a handful of representatives stood against the motion, mostly species who had limited contact with humans during the Great War and remembered them as reluctant but effective allies. The motion carries, the High Arbitrator announced. Humanity is hereby declared a galactic threat. All member species are authorized to begin defensive preparations. A formal declaration of war will be voted upon in 30 galactic standard days, allowing time for military consultation and strategic planning. As the session ended and beings began to disperse to their various ships and transportation methods, few noticed the small observation drone that had been recording everything from a distant corner of the chamber. Its transmission array activated, sending a quantum-encrypted burst of data across the galaxy toward human space. The message would take several days to reach its destination, but when it did, it would be received by beings who had been waiting 5,000 years for exactly this moment. In the deepest military installations of human space, ancient protocols that had been dormant for millennia began to activate. The galaxy was about to rediscover why humanity had chosen isolation over integration, and why some species were better left undisturbed in their chosen solitude. The Great Peace was ending, and very soon, the galactic community would remember what humans became when they decided it was time to stop pretending to be civilized. Admiral Sarah Chun received the intelligence report while standing in the observation deck of Fortress Europa, a military installation built inside a hollowed-out moon that had been moved to the edge of the Sol system. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum, she could see the vast construction yards where humanity's newest ships took shape in the cold vacuum of space. The data packet from their galactic surveillance network painted a clear picture. 1,200 species had just voted to classify humanity as a threat to galactic peace. Chun allowed herself a small smile as she forwarded the information to the other members of the High Command. Jenkins, she called to her aide, a young officer whose family had been preparing for this moment for over 200 generations. Send a message to all fleet commanders. Operation Homecoming is now in effect. Yes, Admiral. How long until the Council comes calling? Chun checked her chronometer and did some quick calculations. Based on their historical patterns, they'll give themselves a month to plan and coordinate. They'll expect us to be surprised, maybe try to negotiate or surrender when their armada arrives. They don't understand that we've been preparing for this conversation since the day we left their little club. The bridge of Fortress Europa buzzed with quiet efficiency as centuries of planning finally shifted into action. Officers who had trained their entire lives for a war they hoped would never come now faced the reality that it was beginning. Ma'am, Communications Officer Rodriguez looked up from her station. We're receiving similar reports from all our monitoring stations. The galactic community is mobilizing. Every major species is converting civilian infrastructure to military production. Let them, Chin replied calmly. How long do our analysts estimate it will take them to build a proper war fleet? 18 to 24 months for basic combat vessels. 3 to 4 years for anything approaching modern military specifications. They're essentially starting from scratch. Chin nodded. It was exactly what the human strategic planners had predicted. When you've enjoyed 5,000 years of peace, you don't maintain the industrial base necessary to wage war. The galactic species would have to learn what humans had never forgotten. Peace was something you prepared for by being ready to fight. Dr. Marcus Webb, the chief historian and one of the few people who actually remembered the end of the Great War, entered the observation deck carrying a data pad filled with classified archives. Admiral, I've pulled the relevant files on Operation Babylon's Fall. The Council is following the same pattern they used in the last war. Overwhelming numbers, coordinated assault, demand for unconditional surrender. And how did that work out for them last time? Chen asked, though she knew the answer. The Devourers surrendered unconditionally after humanity demonstrated what happens when we stop holding back. The Council was so horrified by our methods that they banned 17 different categories of weapons and tactics from ever being used in civilized warfare again. Chun accessed her command interface and pulled up the current deployment of human forces. 5,000 years of hidden military buildup had produced results that would have seemed impossible to the species now mobilizing against them. Doctor, remind me again why we never told them what we were building out here. Webb adjusted his glasses and referenced his historical records. Because they asked us to leave, Admiral. After the Devourer War ended, the Council decided that humanity was too dangerous to be trusted with galactic peace. They were afraid of what we might become if we stayed. And now they're afraid of what we became while we were gone, Chen mused. There's a certain poetic justice to that. The tactical display in the center of the observation deck activated, showing the current state of human space. Over 300 star systems, each one a fortress that could hold off invasion fleets many times its size. Asteroid belts that had been converted into vast shipyards and mining operations. Planets whose surfaces bristled with weapons that could reach across solar systems. Commander Lisa Park, head of Human Intelligence Services, materialized as a hologram on the bridge. She was currently stationed on Terra Nova, humanity's new capital world, chosen specifically because it was not the historical Earth that their enemies would expect to attack. Admiral, we've confirmed that the Council has begun coordinating with the Vorthak Empire for joint military operations. Ambassador Zethkar has been appointed Supreme Military Coordinator for what they're calling the Pacification Campaign. Chen laughed, and the sound carried no humor whatsoever. Pacification. They really don't understand who they're dealing with, do they? It gets better, Park continued. Our sources indicate they're planning to give us a chance to surrender peacefully. They want to avoid casualties and maintain their moral high ground. Dr. Webb looked up from his archives with a grim expression. Admiral, I should point out that this is exactly how the Devourer War started. An ultimatum, a chance for peaceful surrender, and then, surprise when the target decided to fight back instead of rolling over. The difference is, Chen said quietly, the Devourers were a single species trying to conquer the galaxy through brute force. The Council represents 1,200 species who think that superior numbers equal victory. They're about to learn that there's a reason we've spent 5 millennia preparing for this. The communication array crackled to life as reports began flowing in from across human space. Fleet Admiral Morrison checked in from the Centauri yards, where the new Thanatos-class battleships were completing their final systems tests. General Harrison reported from the Terra defense grid that all orbital platforms were fully operational and ready for combat. Captain Reyes confirmed that the deep space monitoring stations had detected the first galactic scout ships probing the edges of human territory. Time until first contact, Chen asked. Based on current galactic fleet speeds and their need to coordinate multiple species, Park calculated quickly, we should expect their diplomatic envoy in approximately 6 weeks, followed by their main battle fleet in 8 to 10 weeks. Chun activated the general communication channel that connected every human military installation across 300 star systems. Her voice would reach over 50 billion human soldiers, sailors, marines, and support personnel who had been training for this moment their entire lives. This is Admiral Chun, speaking from Fortress Europa. As of 1,400 hours, Galactic Standard Time, the Galactic Council has officially classified humanity as a threat to interstellar peace. They are mobilizing a fleet of unprecedented size to demand our surrender or destroy our civilization. The pause that followed was filled with the sound of military bases across human space coming to full alert status. For 5,000 years, we have prepared for this moment. Our ancestors chose isolation not out of fear, but out of respect for the galactic community. They hoped that time and distance would prevent the need for another devastating war. Unfortunately, the galaxy has interpreted our peaceful isolation as weakness and our defensive preparations as aggression. Status reports began flooding in as military commanders across human space confirmed their readiness. The numbers were staggering. Fleets that could glass entire solar systems, weapons that could crack planets like eggs, and defensive installations that could hold off invasion forces numbering in the millions of ships. They believe that 5,000 years of peace have made us soft. They think that superior numbers will overcome superior preparation. They are about to discover that humanity has spent every single day of those 5,000 years becoming something they cannot imagine. Chin paused to look out at the construction yards, where the latest generation of human warships gleamed like deadly jewels in the starlight. Each one was more powerful than entire fleets from the time of the Great War. The Council wants to have a conversation about galactic peace. I think it's time we reminded them why our ancestors chose to leave in the first place. All fleet commanders, prepare for Operation Revelation. When their envoys arrive, we're going to show them exactly what 5,000 years of uninterrupted military development looks like. The transmission ended, and, across human space, the greatest military machine in galactic history stirred to life. In hidden bunkers and secret shipyards, in orbital fortresses and planetary defense grids, humanity began to reveal what they had built in the darkness between the stars. The galactic community was mobilizing for war, believing they faced the same species that had reluctantly fought alongside them 5 millennia ago. They had no idea that they were about to encounter something entirely new. Humanity unleashed, no longer bound by the restraints of galactic civilization, no longer holding back to preserve the sensibilities of species that had never truly understood what humans became when survival was at stake. The Great Peace was ending, and, very soon, the galaxy would remember why some sleeping giants should never be awakened. The diplomatic vessel Harmony of Voices dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, carrying the formal delegation from the Galactic Council. Ambassador Zethkar stood on the bridge alongside representatives from 50 of the galaxy's most powerful species, each chosen for their ability to speak with authority for their respective civilizations. Beginning sensor sweep of the system, announced navigation specialist Krilltak, a spider-like being whose multiple eyes could process visual data across dozens of spectrums simultaneously. Initial readings are confusing. Zethkar moved to the sensor station, his four arms working the controls with practiced efficiency. What he saw on the displays made his blood run cold. The Sol system, which their records showed as humanity's ancient birthplace, was no longer recognizable. Where Earth's moon had once orbited, a massive military installation now hung in space, bristling with weapon systems that defied classification. The asteroid belt had been completely stripped and reconstructed into an enormous shipyard complex that stretched for millions of kilometers. Mars had been converted into what appeared to be a single, planet-sized fortress. "This cannot be accurate," whispered the ethereal representative, her energy form flickering with disbelief. "Our intelligence reports indicated moderate defensive improvements, not this." The sensor operator's mandibles clicked nervously as more data processed. "Ambassador, I'm detecting over 15,000 individual ships in this system alone. And these readings..." He paused, recalibrating his instruments. "These ships are massive. The largest ones appear to be nearly 50 kilometers in length." The delegation fell silent. During the Great War, the largest battleships in the galaxy had been perhaps 2 kilometers long. The idea of ships 25 times that size was beyond their comprehension. "Incoming transmission," the communications officer announced. "It's being broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously, and somehow it's bypassing our translation systems and speaking directly to each species in their native language." The main view screen activated, revealing a human female in an immaculate military uniform. Her expression was polite, but carried an undertone that made several species instinctively step back from the screen. "Welcome to Sol System, representatives of the Galactic Council. I am Admiral Sarah Chun, Supreme Commander of Human Defense Forces. We've been expecting you." Zethkar moved forward, drawing himself up to his full impressive height. "Admiral Chun, I am Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire, speaking for the Galactic Council. We come seeking peaceful dialogue regarding humanity's recent aggressive expansion and military buildup." Chin's smile was perfectly pleasant and absolutely terrifying. "Aggressive expansion? Ambassador, we haven't left our territory in 5,000 years. We've simply made some improvements to our neighborhood. Would you care to see them?" Before anyone could object, the space around the Harmony of Voices began to change. What had appeared to be empty voids suddenly revealed itself to be filled with human ships, each one materializing as their stealth systems deactivated. Within moments, the diplomatic vessel was surrounded by a fleet that numbered in the hundreds. "Fascinating cloaking technology," Chen continued conversationally. "We developed it about 3,000 years ago. Very useful for home security." The ships surrounding them were unlike anything in the galactic database. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed to ignore basic principles of physics, and their weapon systems tracked the diplomatic vessel with predatory precision. "As for our military buildup," Chun continued, "we prefer to think of it as hobby crafting. 5,000 years is a long time to have nothing to do but tinker with engineering projects." The crystalline hive mind's representative attempted to process what they were seeing through their vast computational network. "Admiral, our calculations suggest that the energy output required to maintain this fleet exceeds the total power generation capacity of most galactic civilizations. How is this possible?" "Oh, that's simple," Chen replied cheerfully. "We've learned to use stars as batteries. Very efficient once you work out the technical details. Would you like a demonstration?" She gestured to something off-screen, and suddenly, one of the system's outer planets began to glow. The rocky world's surface temperature increased by several thousand degrees in a matter of seconds, turning its atmosphere into a brilliant aurora that could be seen from across the solar system. That's just a tiny fraction of what our solar collection network can do, Shin explained. We found that having access to unlimited energy makes all sorts of interesting projects possible. The delegation was speechless. Several representatives were frantically transmitting emergency reports to their home worlds, while others seemed to be experiencing various forms of shock. Now then, Chun continued, I understand you have some concerns about galactic peace and security. Perhaps we should discuss this face-to-face. I'm transmitting landing coordinates for our diplomatic facility on Luna Base. Don't worry about the weapons lock warnings your computers are probably showing. Those are just automatic targeting systems. They won't fire unless we feel threatened. Ambassador Zethkar found his voice, though it took considerable effort. Admiral, the Galactic Council has authorized me to offer humanity a peaceful resolution to this situation. We propose a return to the previous status quo, with guaranteed non-interference in human affairs in exchange for a commitment to remain within your current territorial boundaries. Chin's expression didn't change, but somehow the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ambassador, you seem to be operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. You see, we never agreed to those territorial boundaries. We simply chose to respect them out of courtesy to the galactic community. The implications of her words sent shockwaves through the delegation. If humanity didn't recognize the borders that had been established after the Great War, then, technically they weren't bound by any of the agreements that had maintained galactic peace for 5 millennia. Furthermore, Chun continued, your offer implies that we need your permission to exist. I'm afraid that's not how this works. You declared war on us, remember? We're simply responding to your diplomatic initiative. The energy being from the void realms spoke through quantum fluctuations that registered as barely audible whispers. Admiral, surely there has been a misunderstanding. The Council seeks only to maintain the peace that has blessed our galaxy for 5,000 years. Peace. Chin's laugh was genuinely amused. You call it peace when you mobilize 1,200 species to threaten a civilization that never attacked you? When you vote to classify an entire species as galactic threats without ever attempting diplomatic contact? That's not peace, representatives. That's tyranny disguised as democracy. She leaned forward slightly, and her expression became deadly serious. Let me be very clear about something. Humanity chose isolation to protect you, not ourselves. We left galactic civilization because we understood that our nature was incompatible with the kind of society you wanted to build. We hoped that distance and time would prevent the need for conflict. The ships surrounding the diplomatic vessel began to move in complex patterns, their formations shifting like schools of predatory fish. Each movement was perfectly coordinated, suggesting a level of tactical integration that most species couldn't achieve even with their most advanced computer systems. But you couldn't leave well enough alone, Shin continued. You decided that our peaceful isolation was somehow threatening to your security. You convinced yourselves that we were planning aggression when we were simply trying to be left alone. And now you come here with ultimatums and demands, expecting us to submit to your judgment. The medical collective's representative, a being whose species had evolved beyond individual consciousness into a shared healing network, attempted to project calming pheromones into the ship's atmosphere. Admiral, surely we can find a peaceful solution that serves everyone's interests. We already had a peaceful solution, Chen replied firmly. We stayed in our space, you stayed in yours, and everyone was happy. But you decided that wasn't good enough. You decided we needed to be controlled or eliminated. She gestured again, and the view screen split to show multiple displays of human military installations across their territory. Fleets that numbered in the thousands, defensive platforms that could destroy entire invasion forces, weapon systems that appeared to bend the laws of physics. So here's our counterproposal, Chen said. You return to your territories and resume your peaceful way of life. You forget about humanity and our supposed threat to galactic security. You pretend we don't exist, just like you have for the past 5,000 years. And, in return, we'll continue to pretend that we're bound by the territorial agreements that we never actually signed. The silence that followed was deafening. Every representative understood the implicit threat in her words. If humanity didn't consider themselves bound by galactic law, then nothing prevented them from expanding wherever they chose. And if the Council finds this proposal unacceptable? Zethkar asked, though he already dreaded the answer. Chin's smile returned, but now it carried the warmth of a winter morning. Then, you'll have the war you came here to start. And I think you'll find that humanity has learned quite a lot about warfare during our 5,000 years of peaceful isolation. The diplomatic vessel's sensors detected massive energy buildups throughout the system as human ships began powering their main weapons systems. The displays showed numbers that should have been impossible, energy outputs that rivaled stellar phenomena, targeting systems that could track individual molecules across interstellar distances. You have 24 hours to consider our proposal, Chin announced. After that, we'll assume you've chosen the alternative. I do hope you'll make the wise decision, representatives. Because once we stop being peaceful neighbors, we become something that even the ancient races learned to fear. The transmission ended, leaving the delegation alone with the reality of their situation. They had come expecting to intimidate a backward species into submission. Instead, they had discovered that they were small fish in a very large and very dangerous pond. As emergency transmissions began flooding back toward galactic civilization, one fact became crystal clear. The sleeping giant had awakened, and it was not happy about being disturbed. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Representatives who had received the transmission from the Sol System diplomatic mission were in various states of panic, disbelief, and strategic recalculation. The crystalline chamber that usually resonated with civilized debate now buzzed with fearful whispers and desperate consultations. Ambassador Zethkar stood at the central podium, his forearms trembling slightly as he accessed the holographic displays. The images from Sol System played on repeat. Ships that defied comprehension, weapons that could melt planets, and, most terrifying of all, the calm confidence of Admiral Chun as she delivered humanity's ultimatum. Fellow representatives, Zethkar began, his voice carrying none of its usual bombast. We have witnessed something that challenges everything we thought we knew about galactic civilization. The humans have not simply been preparing for war. They have been preparing to rewrite the very nature of warfare itself. The ethereal collective's representative flickered with uncertainty. The energy readings we detected are beyond our theoretical maximums. Their ships appear to operate outside known physics. Either our instruments are malfunctioning, or humanity has achieved technological breakthroughs that should be impossible. Dr. Veltar of the Scientific Union, a being whose crystalline brain had been studying galactic technology for over a millennium, materialized a complex three-dimensional equation in the chamber's center. I have analyzed the sensor data extensively. The humans have achieved what we call a technological singularity at least 3 times over. Each breakthrough has exponentially accelerated their development. The implications sent ripples of fear through species that had considered themselves technologically advanced. If humanity's rate of development had been exponential rather than linear, then 5,000 years of isolation represented a gap that couldn't be measured in mere centuries, but in entire evolutionary epochs. How many ships? Asked the mechanical collective, their artificial minds processing tactical scenarios with cold precision. Zethkar consulted his reports with growing dread. Our preliminary estimates suggest at least 50,000 combat vessels, with the largest ones measuring over 50 kilometers in length. But those are just the ships we could detect. Their stealth technology is so advanced that we may have seen only a fraction of their actual fleet strength. The chamber erupted in panicked communications as representatives began calculating the implications. During the Great War, the largest galactic fleet ever assembled had numbered perhaps 10,000 ships. The idea that humanity alone possessed 5 times that number was beyond comprehension. The High Arbitrator called for order, its quantum-based voice cutting through the chaos. The question before us is no longer whether humanity represents a threat, but whether we can survive the conflict we have initiated. Their ultimatum is clear: withdraw and pretend they don't exist, or face the consequences of war. The swarm queens released distress pheromones so potent that even species without chemical communication could sense their terror. Our hive analysis indicates that human military development has followed paths completely unknown to galactic civilization. They have weaponized technologies that we use for peaceful purposes and developed entirely new branches of warfare that we have no defense against. Elder Tamthara of the Wise Seekers slowly rose from her meditation platform, her ancient form showing the weight of terrible knowledge. I have been reviewing the classified archives from the Devourer War, the records that were sealed to prevent panic among the galactic population. A hush fell over the chamber. Few beings alive remembered the true details of how that conflict had ended, and fewer still had access to the complete records. The humans did not simply defeat the Devourers, Tamthara continued, her voice heavy with memory. They broke them so thoroughly that the surviving Devourer colonies surrendered unconditionally after witnessing what humanity called demonstration strikes. The weapons used in those demonstrations were immediately classified and banned from ever being used again. What kind of weapons? Whispered the representative from the peaceful traders, a species that had never known violence in their entire evolutionary history. Tamthara accessed data so classified that several security protocols activated automatically. The humans created weapons that could destroy stars. Not just make them unstable, but actually annihilate them completely, erasing entire solar systems from existence. They built devices that could manipulate time itself, trapping enemy fleets in temporal loops until they chose to surrender. They developed biological agents that could rewrite the genetic code of entire species. The horror that swept through the chamber was palpable. Several species began immediate emergency evacuations of their civilian populations, while others started calculating the distance between their homeworlds and human space. The Council convinced them to destroy these weapons, Tamthara continued. We promised that galactic civilization would never again require such extreme measures to maintain peace. In return, humanity agreed to withdraw from galactic society and limit their territorial expansion. The crystalline hive mind's 1,000 voices spoke in perfect unison, creating a harmony of despair. And now we have broken that promise. We have forced them back into the role of galactic enforcers. We have awakened something that was mercifully sleeping. Admiral Kreetok of the warrior clans, one of the few military leaders in the galactic community, attempted to restore some semblance of strategic thinking to the discussion. What are our military options? How many ships can we field against them? The numbers, when calculated, were sobering. The combined fleets of 1,200 species could potentially field approximately 30,000 combat vessels, but most of these would be hastily converted civilian craft with minimal armament. Against humanity's demonstrated technological superiority, numbers might prove meaningless. We could attempt to negotiate, suggested the diplomatic corps representative, though her voice carried little hope. Perhaps we can find a middle ground that satisfies their demands while preserving galactic security. Zethkar's bitter laugh echoed through the chamber. They gave us their terms. Complete withdrawal from any involvement in human affairs, in exchange for continued peaceful isolation. There is no middle ground. We either submit to their ultimatum, or we face a war we cannot win. The computing clusters, vast networks of artificial intelligences that had been calculating strategic options since the crisis began, finally completed their analysis. Their conclusion was delivered with mechanical precision and devastating clarity. Probability of galactic victory in open warfare with humanity, 0.003%. Probability of negotiated settlement favorable to galactic interests, 12.7%. Probability of complete galactic subjugation if hostilities commence, 87.3%. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several representatives collapsing in various forms of shock. The reality was inescapable. They had challenged a species so far beyond them technologically that resistance was essentially suicide. Perhaps, the energy beings suggested through quantum fluctuations, we should consider that humanity's isolation was not a retreat, but a gift. They removed themselves from galactic affairs to prevent exactly this situation. The philosophical implications were staggering. If humanity had voluntarily withdrawn to protect other species from their own capabilities, then the current crisis was entirely the result of galactic aggression against beings who had been trying to keep the peace through isolation. What about the other ancient races? asked someone from the deep chamber. The eternal wanderers, the dream weavers, the void touched? Surely they would assist us against such a threat. Elder Tamthara's expression grew even more grim. I have been in communication with the ancient races since this crisis began. Their response has been unanimous. This is a problem of our own making, and we must face the consequences alone. Several have already begun relocating their civilizations to distant galaxies to avoid being caught in the crossfire. The realization that even beings millions of years old were fleeing rather than face humanity in open conflict sent the final shockwave through the galactic community. If entities that had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations considered humans too dangerous to oppose, what chance did younger species have? The High Arbitrator called for a vote, though the outcome was already clear. All those in favor of accepting humanity's ultimatum and withdrawing all military forces from their territorial boundaries. The vote was unanimous. Even Zethkar, who had initiated the crisis, raised his arms in acceptance of defeat. All those opposed, not a single representative stood against the motion. Motion carried unanimously. The High Arbitrator announced, all military preparations against humanity are hereby terminated. All diplomatic contact with human space is suspended indefinitely. Galactic civilization will respect human territorial boundaries and make no further attempts to interfere with their affairs. As the session ended and representatives began dispersing to carry the news to their respective civilizations, one fact was clear to everyone present. Humanity had won a war without firing a single shot. Their mere demonstration of capability had been so overwhelming that 1,200 species had chosen submission over conflict. The Great Peace was restored, but now everyone understood the true price of galactic security. It wasn't maintained by the wisdom of the Council or the cooperation of civilized species. It existed because humanity chose to let it exist, and that choice could be revoked at any moment. Somewhere in the deep reaches of human space, Admiral Chun received the notification of the Council's surrender and allowed herself a small smile. The galaxy had finally learned the lesson that humanity had been trying to teach them for 5,000 years. Some neighbors are best left alone. 5 years had passed since the galactic community's unanimous surrender, and the effects of that decision continued to ripple through civilized space. Dr. Marcus Webb, now serving as Director of Human Cultural Relations, stood in his office aboard Terra Nova Station, reviewing reports from across the galaxy that painted a fascinating picture of how quickly things could change. The irony was not lost on him that his department, which had been effectively defunct for millennia, was now one of the busiest branches of human government. Every day brought new requests for limited contact, trade negotiations, and cultural exchange programs from species that had recently voted to declare humanity a galactic threat. Director Webb, his assistant, Lieutenant Commander Park, entered with the daily briefing packet. We have 17 new formal requests for diplomatic contact, 43 applications for limited trade agreements, and 237 academic papers requesting access to human scientific databases. Webb smiled as he reviewed the applications. The species that had once feared human aggression were now desperately curious about human advancement. The complete technological disparity demonstrated during the Sol System incident had fundamentally altered how galactic civilization viewed itself. Any particularly interesting requests today? The Crystalline Hive Mind is offering to share their entire computational network in exchange for access to human energy manipulation technology. The Ethereal Collective wants to establish a joint research program on consciousness transfer. And the Vorthak Empire has formally requested permission to study human military logistics. The last request made Webb chuckle. Ambassador Zethkar, who had initiated the crisis 5 years earlier, had become one of humanity's most vocal admirers in the galaxy. His transformation from warmonger to advocate was perhaps the most dramatic example of how the demonstration had changed galactic perspectives. What's our response protocol for these requests? Park asked. Webb consulted the guidelines established by Admiral Chun and the Human Council. Standard procedure. We'll share basic scientific principles that don't compromise security, offer limited cultural exchange programs, and maintain trade relationships that benefit both parties. We're not trying to dominate the galaxy. Just convince them to leave us alone. The irony of the situation was that humanity's attempt to avoid galactic attention had made them the most sought-after partners in civilized space. By demonstrating capabilities beyond galactic comprehension, they had inadvertently become the galaxy's most desirable allies. A priority communication alert chimed, indicating an incoming message from Admiral Chen herself. Webb activated the secure channel, and Chen's image appeared in holographic form. Director Webb, we have a situation developing that requires your expertise. The Galactic Council has submitted a formal request for human membership. Webb's eyebrows shot up. They want us to rejoin the Council? After everything that's happened? It gets better, Chen continued. They're offering us a permanent seat on the High Arbitration Board, with veto power over all galactic legislation. Essentially, they want to make humanity the final authority on galactic security and peace. The implications were staggering. The same galactic community that had voted to declare humanity a threat now wanted to give them ultimate authority over galactic civilization. It was the ultimate acknowledgement that their previous approach to maintaining peace had been fundamentally flawed. What's our response going to be? Chen's expression was thoughtful. That's what I need you to analyze. What are the long-term implications of accepting versus declining their offer? Webb pulled up his historical databases and began running scenarios. If we accept, we become responsible for maintaining galactic peace and security. That's exactly the role we withdrew from 5,000 years ago because we felt it was incompatible with our nature. And if we decline, then we maintain our isolation, but we also signal that we're not interested in galactic affairs even when invited. That could be interpreted as either wisdom or indifference, depending on how the galaxy develops from here. Admiral Chen nodded. I want you to prepare a comprehensive analysis of both options. But first, I think you should see what's been happening in the galaxy since our little demonstration. The holographic display expanded to show a galactic map with data overlays indicating various trends and developments. What Webb saw surprised him. Interstellar conflicts had decreased by over 90% in the 5 years since the Sol System incident. Trade disputes that had previously led to military confrontations were now being resolved through arbitration. Several long-standing territorial conflicts had been settled peacefully when the participants realized that neither side wanted to attract human attention to their dispute. The galaxy has been more peaceful in the last 5 years than in any comparable period in recorded history, Chen explained. The mere knowledge that humanity exists and is watching has fundamentally changed how galactic civilization conducts itself. Webb studied the data more carefully. It's fascinating. They're policing themselves because they're afraid of what we might do if they don't. Exactly. We've accidentally created the most effective peacekeeping force in galactic history simply by existing and demonstrating our capabilities once. The philosophical implications were profound. Humanity had achieved, through isolation and demonstration, what the Galactic Council had failed to accomplish through 5 millennia of diplomacy and cooperation. Fear of human intervention had become a more powerful force for peace than any treaty or alliance. Director, Park interrupted. We're receiving a real-time transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting an immediate response to their membership offer. Webb looked at Admiral Chen's hologram. What's your instinct on this? Chen was quiet for a moment, considering. My instinct is that we're at a crossroads. We can continue our isolation and watch the galaxy police itself out of fear of our displeasure. Or we can accept a formal role in galactic governance and try to build something better than what existed before. The transmission from the Galactic Council was patched through, showing the familiar crystalline chamber where 1,200 species had once voted to go to war against humanity. Now those same representatives waited anxiously for humanity's decision on their future. The High Arbitrator spoke through quantum fluctuations that resonated with desperate hope. Representatives of humanity, the Galactic Council formally requests your return to galactic civilization. We acknowledge that our previous approach to maintaining peace was flawed, and that your wisdom is necessary for the continued prosperity of all species. Elder Tamthara, who had witnessed both the Great War and humanity's withdrawal, added her voice to the request. We understand now that your isolation was an act of mercy, not abandonment. You removed yourselves from galactic affairs to prevent the very confrontation we forced upon you. We ask not for your forgiveness, but for your guidance. The offer was unprecedented. Complete authority over galactic security, with the power to veto any decision that might threaten interstellar peace. It was everything humanity could have asked for, and exactly what they had tried to avoid by leaving in the first place. Webb made his recommendation to Admiral Chun through a private channel. Admiral, I think we need to consider a third option. I'm listening. We accept a limited advisory role, not full membership, but a formal consultancy position. We remain in our territory, but we provide guidance on major galactic decisions. They get our wisdom without our direct involvement, and we maintain our isolation while helping prevent future crises. Chen considered this for several minutes while the Galactic Council waited in patient hope. Finally, she activated the general transmission to address the galaxy directly. Representatives of the Galactic Council, humanity appreciates your offer and acknowledges the wisdom behind it. However, we believe there is a better path forward. The chamber held its collective breath. Humanity will accept a consultative role in galactic affairs. We will not rejoin the Council as members, but we will establish a permanent diplomatic mission to provide guidance on matters of galactic security and peace. Our representatives will have advisory authority on all major decisions affecting interstellar stability. The relief that swept through the chamber was palpable. It wasn't everything they had asked for, but it was more than they had dared hope for after declaring war on humanity. Furthermore, Chun continued, humanity commits to maintaining our role as galactic peacekeepers, not through force or dominance, but through the same method that has proven so effective over the past 5 years, by existing as a reminder that some conflicts are too dangerous to pursue. The applause that followed was unlike anything in the Chamber's history. Representatives from 1,200 species celebrated not just the avoidance of catastrophe, but the beginning of a new era of galactic civilization. As the transmission ended and the immediate crisis resolved, Webb reflected on the strange turn of events. Humanity had tried to withdraw from galactic affairs to avoid becoming galactic enforcers, only to discover that their withdrawal had made them the most effective enforcers in the galaxy's history. The Great Peace would continue, but now everyone understood how it was maintained. Not through the wisdom of the Council or the cooperation of civilized species, but through the simple knowledge that somewhere in the deep reaches of space, humanity was watching and would not tolerate another galactic war. It was, Webb thought, probably the most human solution possible, maintaining peace through the implied threat of overwhelming force, while hoping never to have to use it. The galaxy had finally learned to live with its most dangerous neighbors by giving them no reason to stop being neighborly. And, in the depths of human space, construction continued on projects that would make the Sol system demonstration look like a gentle warning. Because the one lesson that humanity had learned from 5,000 years of preparation was simple. Peace was something you maintained by being ready for war, and the galaxy had a very long way to go before it was truly safe from its own worst impulses.